Tonight, the bill to bust inflation.
The bill, as amended, is passed.
Democrats tout a victory. Even as Republicans warn the Inflation Reduction Act will serve to increase soaring costs across the economy.
And this Inflation Reduction Act is a lie. It's not going to reduce inflation.
Plus, wake-up call. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan badly damaging U.S.-China relations. China extending military drills along Taiwan's coast.
I'm not worried, but I'm concerned that they're moving as much as they are.
All this and more on Faith Nation. Inflation reduction or bust. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Caitlin Burke. Democrats say relief for inflation is on the way. A weekend vote in the Senate advancing legislation they believe will address the high prices plaguing Americans. It came down to a tiebreaker, the bill gaining full Democratic support, but winning over no Republicans. CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka has more on what's in this new bill and how much it'll cost. Matt?
Well, Caitlin, Senate Democrats needed the vice president to cast the deciding vote, but they did pass the roughly $900 billion Inflation Reduction Act after a marathon weekend. The bill addresses major party priorities heading into November's midterms, but Republicans say it's the funding to hire thousands of IRS workers that is a way to go after the middle class.
The vice president votes in the affirmative, and the bill, as amended, is passed.
The Democrat-sponsored bill purported to combat climate change, lower medical costs, and reduce the federal deficit through taxes on high earners passed along party lines.
I am really confident that the Inflation Reduction Act will endure as one of the defining feats of the 21st century.
President Biden emphasized the bill's prescription drug pricing changes.
There's a whole range of things that are really game changers for ordinary folks. Now, some of it's not going to kick in for a little bit, but it's all good. It's really going to lower the daily. When you sit down at that kitchen table at the end of the month, you'll be able to pay a whole hell of a lot more bills because you're paying less in medical bills.
The legislation eventually came together thanks to moderate Democrats Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona coming on board. Former President Donald Trump blasted both senators over the weekend, vowing to campaign against them when they're up for re-election.
Joe Manchin has totally sold out West Virginia. What he's done to that state is disgraceful.
Critics say the bill will not accomplish the things it claims to achieve, specifically reducing inflation. Republicans blasted the hundreds of billions in new spending during a time when Americans are already paying more.
And this Inflation Reduction Act is a lie. It's not going to reduce inflation.
$80 billion of the bill is dedicated to modernizing the Internal Revenue Service, which results in adding some 87,000 employees over the next 10 years. That would more than double its current workforce, making it one of the largest federal agencies and increasing its budget by some 600%.
If you look at the past, the audits disproportionately impact those that are middle class, upper middle class, income earners. Those are the ones that get targeted by this. And that's a big part of the reason why the estimates are that those at the very bottom of adjusted gross income, they're actually going to be impacted most in terms of the percentage increase in the taxes that they pay.
The nearly $400 billion in the bill for climate change is the largest commitment ever for environmental concerns. The House is expected to take up and vote on the bill on Friday. Caitlin?
Thanks, Matt. Here with us now is CBN News Chief Political Analyst David Brody. David, Democrats are touting this bill as a major victory, but could it backfire if inflation doesn't actually go down?
Well, there's no doubt about that. And here's the problem. It's going to take time, a lot of time. And the last time I checked on my calendar, it's now August, September, October, November. Hey, I'm pretty good at math. That's 3 months until the midterm elections. You're going to tell me inflation all of a sudden is going to get turned around in 3 months? Not happening. It doesn't. Forget the Inflation Reduction Act for a second. It wouldn't have happened anyhow. And now you're talking the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to have to, go through the machinations, if you will, of having all the money get into the economy and all of the different levers of all of this go each and every different way. So it's going to take time. So either way, the Democrats are not going to be able to see any fruit from this come the November election, if there's going to be any fruit at all.
Now, Republicans say all of the new IRS spending will hit middle-class Americans especially hard. How come?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, first of all, let's start with the corporate tax rate of 15%, a minimum 15% corporate tax rate. Well, so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if the corporate tax rate goes up, the corporation's tax bills will go up. If the corporation's tax bills go up, you think they're going to bite that cost? Absolutely not. They're going to pass it along to the consumers. As a matter of fact, the Joint Committee on Taxation literally says that about 31% of that cost gets transferred over to the consumer. So you'll be paying more in goods and services, not to mention the low-wage workers who will see their see their wages even go lower. So this is all going to hit the middle class from that standpoint. Not to mention they've done all the math on the taxes, and actually you would see indeed that their taxes would increase over time. So there's all sorts of problems with this, and they've really given the Republicans a good talking point here, because Joe Biden said he would not raise taxes on anybody making under $400,000 a year. And technically, while the bill doesn't call for that, it could have the effect of doing exactly that, and that's giving Republicans a pretty good talking point.
Now, speaking of good talking points, as you saw in Matt's piece, former President Trump blasted the Inflation Reduction Act over the weekend, specifically taking aim at moderate Democratic Senators Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Do you expect this to hurt them come midterms?
Well, I don't know. Possibly. I mean, Trump says he's going to be on the warpath and doing, campaigning against Manchin and Sinema and making this a whole big deal. Look, I think the Democrats have just done enough damage in and of itself. I mean, the last thing that needs to happen here when it comes to inflation, many economists say, will be that more money needs to be going to X, Y, and Z. Even Bernie Sanders said the Inflation Reduction Act is not going to help inflation. So I think Democrats are really their own worst enemy. And I don't think it'll matter so much if Trump or anybody else goes after Manchin and Sinema and all that stuff. Let the Democrats kind of eat their own. I think that's what they're going to do. And I don't think this is going to matter so much what Republicans do with Manchin and Sinema. I think it's what the Democrats are not doing when it comes to inflation.
All right. As always, David Brody, thanks for coming on.
You bet.
It's been almost 2 weeks since parts of eastern Kentucky were swept away by the worst flooding in 50 years. Today, the President and First Lady toured the devastation with Governor Andy Beshear.
And as I stood at the site where we lost those 4 children, nothing remains of that house but a little plastic swing is still sitting in the back where they would push 1 or 2 of those children, the oldest of which was in 2nd grade. The tragedy just comes all that much more home. Might qualify. Recently,
President Biden vowed to have the federal government cover 100% of the costs for 30 days of search and rescue and debris removal. Still, state officials fear it will take several years to rebuild. Looking overseas, tensions between the U.S. and China remain high. Beijing announcing an extension to the military exercises launched in response to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island. President Biden downplaying the provocation.
I'm not worried, but I'm concerned that they're moving as much as they are. But I don't think they're going to do anything more.
As Beijing continues the military drills with warplanes and ships performing attack simulations around Taiwan, the Taiwanese foreign minister says life for them goes on as normal, and the best way to deal with China is to show resilience. Joining us now is Peter Rao, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute and an expert on foreign policy. Peter, thanks for coming on Faith Nation. The president says he's not worried, but is concerned. How big of a deal is the extension of Chinese military drills? Is this an invasion dress rehearsal?
Well, it may be an invasion dress rehearsal. I don't think that the main play is on the horizon anytime soon, but clearly China is telegraphing how it would behave in the event of hostilities. It is for the first time combining various forms of military pressure. It's using rockets, which it's fired over the island of Taiwan for the first time, actually landing in the exclusive economic zone of Japan, a close ally of the United States. It has used its military vessels, so its Navy, to take up drill zones surrounding Taiwan in an encirclement scenario. And its fighter jets have broken through the midpoint line in the Taiwan Straits between the Chinese mainland and Taiwan. And most impressively, it's tried to coordinate these different military services, which is really the calling card of a modern first-class military, combined arms warfare. So yes, I would say that this is very concerning. The USS Ronald Reagan is nearby observing the drills, as we are, of course, from overhead. And we'll see what we can learn operationally about the Chinese mode of warfare and how it's behaving, hopefully quite a bit in the coming weeks and months. But it is a major escalation, which we haven't seen in recent memory.
Do you believe this is all truly a response to Speaker Pelosi's visit, or is China just using that as a pretense for military action?
I would say it's a combination of things. For one, I don't think that Speaker Pelosi's visit was well prepared. I would share the G7 foreign minister's statement that parliamentarians from the West should be allowed to visit Taiwan. I think we should support Speaker Pelosi in wanting to go. But by signaling to the White House that she was going, and the White House then leaking to the press their dissatisfaction with the visit, I think it signaled in China that there were differences between the White House and the Congress, and that perhaps by escalating, increasing pressure in the lead up to the trip, they may be able to forestall it and keep the speaker from traveling to Taiwan. Anyone who knows Nancy Pelosi, I think, would agree, though, that she's not easily cowed and that it's difficult to put pressure on her. So she had to go. She did end up going. And now I think this really reflects China believing that the gap in power between it and the United States is no longer as great as it was in the mid-1990s during the Clinton administration, when we had the third Taiwan Straits crisis. Back then, a Taiwanese politician, President Lee, traveled to his alma mater, Cornell. This time it's an American politician, the speaker, traveling to Taiwan. The difference in military response, I think, just reflects many in Beijing thinking that their time is approaching. China is a near-peer competitor of the United States, and they can take on the U.S. And so we've seen an expansive form of military operations and drills that we haven't really seen in the past.
Right. Now, you mentioned the initial White House reaction, which was hesitant to the speaker visiting Taiwan, but the trip has continued to get bipartisan support. Was it the right move?
I think that a speaker's visit to Taiwan, or really any members of Congress's visit to Taiwan, is our own prerogative. It fits neatly within our Taiwan policy defined in the late 1970s through the Taiwan Relations Act and the 3 communiques, which means one China policy. We recognize that Taiwan is part of the mainland, or the mainland is part of Taiwan, however one wants to interpret it, but also that we don't believe there should be a unilateral change in status. This is, I think, neatly within that category. It's consistent with it. One could argue about the timing. I think now is as good as any. What I would have preferred seeing is for the speaker to actually make it a bipartisan trip by inviting along Republican members of Congress and really forging a national unity position on this, rather than traveling as she did. But now that the trip has gone forward, there's no taking it back, and I think it probably behooves all of us to at least support the national leadership on it.
Okay, Peter Rao with the Hudson Institute, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, the abortion battle becomes local. The first post-Roe state to restrict abortion next. Indiana is now the first state to approve abortion restrictions since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. The governor there on Friday signing a near-total abortion ban set to go into law September 15th.
We have heard from a number of individuals who are saying protect these children, protect life.
The law forbids abortions from the time a fertilized egg implants in a uterus. Exceptions include when the mother's life is at risk and in some cases of rape and incest, as well as fatal abnormalities in the baby. Abortions can only be performed in hospitals or outpatient centers owned by hospitals. Meanwhile, last week, Kansas voters rejected an effort to amend the Constitution to protect life. Some 15 other states already had laws in place to roll back abortion once the Supreme Court ruled. Any student must be allowed in any space or risk the loss of federal funding. That's what both public and private schools are now facing under the Biden administration's new interpretation of Title IX. States are pushing back on the new requirements for schools regarding students who identify as transgender. This week, 20 attorneys general sued the administration over a policy that could affect school meal programs. Heather Sells has the story.
The Biden administration wants all schools that receive federal help to provide open access to bathrooms, locker rooms, and sports based on students' self-perceived gender identity. That desire, however, is hitting some legal roadblocks.
There's really no compromise. Sex is either male or female, or, as the Biden administration is putting forward, the idea of sex can be overridden by gender identity. And gender identity is simply your self-perception.
Attorney Mary Rice Hassan has followed the administration's new interpretation of Title IX, a rule which flips the traditional understanding of sex-segregated spaces. The change forces both public and private schools that rely on federal funding to comply.
It's a confusing time for educators, both anyone who receives federal money.
That financial pipeline is worth millions, even billions, to some states. Tennessee, for example, receives $1.5 billion a year for K through 12, and its universities receive $88 million. It's why the state's attorney general has led 19 other states to fight the Education Department over its 2021 reinterpretation of Title IX. They argue that the Biden administration wrongly expanded on a 2020 Supreme Court decision known as Bostock. That ruling stated that under federal employment law, sex discrimination includes gender identity and sexual orientation. The Biden administration has expanded Bostock's reach to include Title IX and education. In early July, those 20 states got a reprieve when a federal judge put a temporary hold on the Biden administration's reinterpretation.
The federal court made really clear that the Biden administration had taken Bostock too far.
Attorney Christiana Kiefer has defended female track athletes forced to compete against boys in Connecticut. In September, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals will hear arguments in that case. For now, the states that sued the Biden administration can protect women's locker rooms, bathrooms, and sports teams. The other 30 states must allow any student in any space or risk the loss of funding.
It's not a good place to be. It's very troubling for parents. It's troubling for schools, even private schools, that use federal dollars in some way.
Heather Sells, CBN News.
In the end, it could be up to the Supreme Court to decide these big questions about sex and gender identity and the education system. A bloody battle comes to an end, the latest on a ceasefire between Israel and terrorists in Gaza when Faith Nation returns. Tensions in the Middle East still running high after a bloody weekend. Dozens of Palestinians killed and hundreds wounded in Gaza during Israeli anti-terror operations, women and children among the dead. It came as more than 1,000 rockets were fired over a 3-day period. But tonight, a fragile ceasefire seems to be holding. Chris Mitchell reports from the Gaza border.
Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid met with defense officials, marking the end of Operation Breaking Dawn. The action started Friday afternoon.
It began when we received intelligence, clear, certifiable intelligence, that a mobile terrorism unit was moving towards the border with Israel with large anti-tank missiles. They were going to be fired at residential cars, possibly school buses, heading down one of Israel's major roads. We were successful in eliminating that threat before they could carry out the terror attack.
Israel's targeted strikes also killed the military head of Palestinian Islamic Jihad in northern Gaza and hit other selected terror sites. The terrorists responded by firing hundreds of rockets from Gazan civilian areas into Israeli communities near the border, up the coast to Tel Aviv, and just outside Jerusalem. You see, get another one going out right now. This is that's the Iron Dome. There's two going off. You can see that right now, streaking in the sky. CBN News witnessed the Iron Dome anti-missile system intercepting 7 of the rockets. According to the IDF spokesman, the Iron Dome had a 97% success rate. Nearly 200 of the rockets fired by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad landed within Gaza, causing a number of injuries and deaths. On the Israeli side, most communities have bomb shelters, like the 20 provided by CBN Israel in strategic locations, such as the community of Yesha, just 4 miles from the Gaza border.
We have many surprises. You're not prepared. You're on the way to someplace, and we have this bomb shelter on the way. It calms the children and gives them the security to go to the tennis court and play a little.
The front lines of the conflict, known as Operation Breaking Dawn, are here on the Israeli-Gaza border. But behind the scenes, one of the main players is the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Iran is kind of the backyard of all of these organizations. They are train them, educate them, sponsor them. So Iran play a very, very important and critical role in our region for many, many years by these proxies. And the jihad is one of the main radical Iranian proxies in our region. The jihad, without the Iranian support, they are really non-relevant.
During the 3 days of fighting, the civilian head of Palestinian Islamic Jihad was meeting with Iranian leaders in Tehran. After Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is the second most powerful group in Gaza. The U.S., UK, and a number of other nations have designated them as a terror organization.
Their very mantle, if you read their charter, it says that they cannot allow the existence of the State of Israel. That's what they're trying to do.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Israel-Gaza border.
Coming up, Sea Spot Surf, a championship you won't want to miss next. Finally, tonight, man's best friend taking doggy paddle to the next level. Dozens of dogs hit the waves in California Saturday for the World Dog Surfing Championships, taking home the top prize, a cattle dog named Skylar. But all of the four-legged athletes put on an impressive show. A surfing pit bull named Faith donned a life jacket and goggles, riding the waves right into second place overall. The pups were seemingly focused and balanced, even with hundreds of onlookers. The event also featured pet adoptions and even a canine costume contest. They all looked good. That's going to do it for Faith Nation. We'll see you tomorrow.